The morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds of Robert Steele's corner office, casting zebra-like shadows across the polished mahogany desk. It was 6:45 a.m. in downtown Chicago, and the 43-year-old real estate magnate wasn't supposed to be there. His meticulously maintained calendar had him scheduled for breakfast negotiations across town, but a restless night, filled with half-formed dreams, had pulled him from bed early. Something, a feeling he couldn't name, had drawn him to his office. At this unusual hour, the elevator doors had opened to a floor that should have been empty, silent except for the distant hum of vacuum cleaners. But what he heard instead stopped him cold. Soft, desperate sobbing coming from his private office. Robert paused at the doorway, his leather briefcase heavy in his hand. There, kneeling beside his antique desk, was the morning maid, a young woman he'd passed countless times in the hallway without really seeing. Her name, he recalled with effort, was Dorothy. Her shoulders trembled with each strangled breath, and her small hands clutched an envelope, now crumpled with sweat and tears. She was so lost in her distress that she hadn't heard him enter. "Miss Dorothy?" he called softly, more confused than concerned. She jolted as if struck by electricity. Her eyes, hazel, wide, flooded with anguish, snapped toward him. She scrambled to stand, to collect herself, but her legs seemed unwilling to cooperate. I'm sorry, Mr. Steele," she stammered, hastily wiping tears with the back of her hand. "I didn't know you'd be in today. I'll leave right away." But Robert had already crossed the threshold, drawn by a compassion he hadn't known he possessed. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice gentler than he thought himself capable of. "Why are you crying?" Dorothy hesitated, her gaze fixed on the gleaming floor she'd polished just yesterday. Then, with trembling hands, she extended the envelope toward him, a surrender flag in a battle he hadn't known was being fought. Inside was a letter stamped with the red letterhead of Mercy Hospital, a final notice. Her mother's last chance. For surgery had been revoked. They were discharging her that week. No insurance, no payment, no chance. "I've been working 3 jobs, Dorothy whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I clean here at dawn, then I work nights at Lou's Diner. On 42nd, and on weekends I babysit for the Hendersons in Oak Park. I send everything I earn to the hospital, every dollar. But it's never enough." Robert felt something shift inside him, a tectonic movement in terrain he'd long ago paved over with ambition and pragmatism. In his world, problems were solved with signatures on checks or quick phone calls to the right people. But this wasn't a business challenge, it was a human one, and somehow it had found its way past his defenses, settling like a stone in his chest. He noticed for the first time how worn her uniform was, how her shoes had cracked at the soles. Her fingers bore the calluses of too much scrubbing, too many hours cleaning up after people who never saw her. "What exactly does your mother need?" he asked, surprising himself with his interest. Dorothy looked up, confusion flickering across her tear-stained face. "A heart valve replacement," she explained. "The doctors say her heart is failing, and if she doesn't get the operation within 2 weeks..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The implications hung in the air between them, as tangible as the morning sunlight now, streaming through the windows. Robert placed the letter back in its envelope and returned it to her, his mind already calculating costs and connections. "Go on with your work," he said, his tone returning to its usual businesslike cadence. "I'll see what I can do." She stared at him, disbelief and the faintest glimmer of hope competing in her expression. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, though her eyes revealed her doubt that anything would actually change. As she left, her footsteps nearly silent on the carpeted floor, Robert remained standing in the center of his office, feeling strangely out of place amid the trappings of his success. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. That night, sleep eluded Robert entirely. He paced the length of his penthouse apartment, whiskey in hand, Dorothy's tears replaying in his mind. Robert Steele was known throughout Chicago's business circles for his ruthlessness. At 43, he had transformed his father's modest construction company into a real estate empire, feared and respected for his cold logic and unshakable calm during negotiations. But in Dorothy's quiet desperation, something long dormant had stirred, a memory he'd buried beneath years of aggressive deal-making and calculated social climbing. His own mother, Margaret, lying in a hospital bed while his father paced the hallways, making business calls instead of holding her hand. She had died alone while his father chased contracts and connections. Robert had sworn then, at 19, that success would protect him from such vulnerability. Yet now, all he could think about was a cleaning woman crying beside his desk and the strange hollowness of his spacious apartment. The next morning brought a flurry of phone calls, to his lawyer, to hospital administrators, to old medical school, friends who owed him favors. By noon, he had answers, but they came with their own complications. Dorothy's mother needed specialized care that would cost well beyond what any reasonable person would offer a virtual stranger. Yet Robert found himself pursuing options as if this were the most important acquisition of his career. What had gotten into him? When had someone else's problem become so personally urgent? He told himself it was simple human decency, or perhaps a PR opportunity for the company. But somewhere deeper, in a place he rarely examined, he knew it was something else entirely, a chance to mend something broken long ago. What Robert didn't realize was how this impulsive act of kindness would ripple outward, changing not just Dorothy's life, but his own in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate. Because sometimes the people we help hold up mirrors to truths we've been avoiding, and once seen, these truths cannot be unseen. Dorothy arrived for her morning shift the following day to find her security badge deactivated at the main entrance. Her heart plummeted. Was she being fired for her emotional display, for daring to bring her personal problems into Mr. Steele's pristine office? Before panic could fully take hold, Charles, the head of security, approached her with unusual deference. "Mr. Steele is expecting you in the conference room on 32, he said, handing her a visitor's badge. The elevator ride felt interminable. Dorothy's mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Her family couldn't afford for her to lose this job. Not now. The conference room doors were imposing, heavy oak panels that seemed to guard the secrets of wealth and power. When she finally gathered the courage to knock, Robert's voice called her in immediately. She wasn't prepared for what awaited her. Robert sat at the head of the gleaming table, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a distinguished older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a severe expression, and a younger woman in a crisp blazer with a portfolio open before her. "Dorothy," Robert said, rising slightly as she entered. "This is Dr. James Wilson, Chief of Cardiology at Northwestern Memorial, and Miss Vivian Parker from my legal team." Dorothy's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white with tension. "Please, sit down," Robert continued. "We've been discussing your mother's situation." The doctor cleared his throat. "Mr. Steele has explained the circumstances," he said. "I've reviewed your mother's files this morning. She's a candidate for our valve replacement program, and we have an opening next Tuesday." Dorothy's breath caught. Next Tuesday. Not in some distant, maybe future, but next Tuesday. "But the cost," she began. "That's been arranged," Ms. Parker interjected smoothly. "Mr. Steele's foundation will cover all expenses for the surgery and post-operative care. We've also secured a spot in our company's family medical support program for 6 months of recovery assistance." Dorothy's vision blurred with fresh tears, but these were different from yesterday's. Her mind couldn't process what was happening. Why would this powerful man, who barely knew her name yesterday, do something so extraordinarily generous today? "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Public displays of emotion had never been his forte. "Because I can," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "and because sometimes the system needs correction." But there was more to it, something in his expression that suggested personal ghosts being laid to rest. Dorothy left the meeting in a daze, clutching paperwork that represented nothing short of a miracle for her family. What she couldn't know was that this act of kindness had cracked open something in Robert's carefully constructed world, a fissure that would soon widen into questions about purpose, legacy, and the true nature of success. Will Dorothy's mother survive the surgery? And what unexpected price might Robert pay for his sudden generosity? The following weeks unfolded with dizzying speed. Dorothy's mother, Evelyn, underwent successful surgery, emerging fragile but with renewed hope. Dorothy split her time between the hospital and her jobs, running on coffee and gratitude. She'd expected Mr. Steele's involvement to end with the writing of a check, but to her surprise, he requested weekly updates. Even more surprisingly, he actually listened when she provided them. Each Friday afternoon, Dorothy would spend 15 minutes in his office, perched nervously on the edge of a leather chair worth more than her monthly rent, detailing her mother's progress in halting, reverent tones. At first, these meetings were stiff and formal. Robert would nod occasionally, asking clinical questions that revealed his unexpected knowledge of cardiac recovery protocols. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. Robert began asking about Evelyn as a person, her favorite books, her former career as a music teacher, the widowhood that had left her and Dorothy to fend for themselves. One Friday in late October, as Dorothy described her mother's first unaided steps down the hospital corridor, she noticed Robert staring out the window, his expression distant. "Mr. Steele," she ventured, "is everything all right?" He turned back, seeming almost startled to find her there. "Yes, fine," he said quickly. "I was just thinking, my mother loved music too. She played the cello." It was the first personal detail he'd ever shared, and its significance wasn't lost on Dorothy. That same afternoon, Robert cancelled his evening appointments and drove to the cemetery where his parents were buried. He hadn't visited in nearly 5 years. The marble headstones gleamed in the autumn sunlight, his father's significantly larger and more ostentatious than his mother's simple marker. Standing there, hands thrust deep in his coat pockets, Robert confronted uncomfortable parallels between himself and the father he'd both idolized and resented, the ruthless pursuit of success at the expense of human connection. He drove home. In contemplative silence, the city lights blurring through a windshield suddenly clouded with unexpected emotion. Meanwhile, Dorothy faced challenges of her own. Her co-workers had noticed the special treatment she received from the notoriously demanding Mr. Steele, and rumors spread like wildfire through the building's service corridors. "What did you do to get his attention?" asked Marlene, a lunch server, in the company cafeteria, her tone implying unsavory possibilities. "Nothing like that," Dorothy insisted, her cheeks burning. "He's just helping my mother." But the suspicious glances continued, and Dorothy found herself increasingly isolated. Even her supervisor, Mrs. Hamilton, began assigning her the least desirable cleaning tasks, the executive bathrooms, the sticky-floored break rooms after office parties. "Since you've got such special connections now," Mrs. Hamilton would say, with a thin smile, "I'm sure you won't mind showing the rest of us how it's done." The kindness that had saved her mother was now making Dorothy's daily existence a quiet hell, yet she endured it silently, unwilling to seem ungrateful or to trouble Mr. Steele with such petty matters. What she didn't realize was that Robert had begun noticing these dynamics during his increasingly frequent walks through the building. He observed how conversations stopped when Dorothy entered rooms, how other cleaning staff moved away from her in the elevators. One Tuesday morning, he witnessed Mrs. Hamilton publicly berating Dorothy for a minor spill in the lobby, her voice carrying deliberately across the marble expanse as executives streamed in from their commutes. Robert saw Dorothy's shoulders, hunch with shame, her eyes fixed on the floor as she absorbed the humiliation without protest. Something inside him, something that had been slowly awakening over these past weeks, finally crystallized into clarity and purpose. If you've ever been mistreated at work or know someone who has, how did you handle the situation? Share your experience in the comments below. That afternoon, Dorothy was summoned to the Human Resources Department. Her heart raced as she sat, across from the director, certain she was about to be fired despite Mr. Steele's patronage. Instead, the director slid a folder across the desk with an expression of carefully neutral professionalism. "Mr. Steele has reviewed your personnel file," she explained. "He's noted that you once had 2 years of nursing school before financial circumstances forced you to withdraw." Dorothy blinked in surprise. She'd mentioned this once briefly during their Friday conversations, a dream deferred, then abandoned as life's practicalities took precedence. "Yes," she confirmed cautiously, "that was a long time ago." The HR director opened the folder. "The company is expanding its educational support program for employees. Mr. Steele believes you would be an excellent candidate. Full tuition, a part-time position with flexible hours to accommodate your studies, and a stipend for books and materials." Dorothy stared at the document, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. "But why would he—" "Mr. Steele doesn't explain his decisions," the director cut in, though her expression had softened slightly. "But he did say to tell you that talent shouldn't be wasted, and that your mother might appreciate having a nurse in the family." Tears sprang to Dorothy's eyes for what felt like the 100th time that month, but these were tears of a different nature entirely, not born of desperation or gratitude, but of something more profound, the recognition of her own worth reflected back by someone powerful enough to make others see it too. As she left the HR office, Dorothy caught sight of Robert at the far end of the hall, deep in conversation with board members. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then returned to his discussion, as if nothing significant had passed between them. But something had. The transformation began slowly, then all at once, like a stone rolling downhill, gathering momentum with each turn. Dorothy returned to nursing school, her natural aptitude for the work quickly distinguishing her despite the years away. Her mother continued to recover, moving from the hospital to a rehabilitation facility where Dorothy could visit between classes and her reduced work schedule. And Robert, to the bewilderment of his executive team, initiated a company-wide review of employee support systems that sent shockwaves through Chicago's corporate community. "Since when does Robert Steele care about work-life balance?" became the whispered question at charity galas and business lunches. The answer, had anyone been bold enough to offer it, might have been, since he witnessed firsthand the human cost of systems designed to overlook the vulnerable. Yet as Dorothy bloomed, Robert found himself increasingly restless. The deals that once energized him now seemed hollow, mechanical exercises in accumulation without purpose. He began declining evening networking events to visit hospital wards, observing the intersection of care and commerce from a perspective he'd never before considered. One evening in December, he arrived unannounced at Evelyn's rehabilitation center, feeling oddly compelled to meet the woman whose illness had inadvertently changed the trajectory of his thinking. He found her in the common room, teaching another. Impatient to play simple chords on the facility's out-of-tune piano. She had Dorothy's eyes, he realized, the same mixture of determination and gentle humanity. "Mr. Steele," she said when Dorothy made the introduction, her voice warm but direct. "I've been hoping to meet the man who believed my daughter was worth saving." "Your daughter," Robert replied carefully, "helped me see some things more clearly. If anything, I'm indebted to her." Something in Evelyn's knowing smile suggested she understood far more than he was saying. Their conversation lasted over an hour, touching on music, loss, and the curious ways lives intersect. When he finally rose to leave, Evelyn caught his hand in both of hers. "Whatever drove you to help us," she said quietly, "I hope you find peace with it." Her words followed him out into the winter night, echoing through his thoughts as snowflakes began to fall across the city. Spring arrived with unexpected developments. Dorothy excelled in her clinical rotations, her combination of technical skill and deep empathy drawing notice from instructors. Robert launched a foundation focused on medical debt relief, sending tremors through his social circle. Midlife crisis, some colleagues diagnosed dismissively. Tax strategy, others assumed with knowing winks. None guessed the truth, that a chance encounter with a crying maid had forced Robert to confront the hollowness at the center of his achievements. One rainy April morning, Dorothy arrived at his office for what had become monthly progress meetings rather than weekly ones. She carried herself differently now, still respectful, but with the growing confidence of someone finding her true path. "My mother's cardiologist says she's making remarkable progress," she reported. "She's even talking about teaching piano lessons again." Robert nodded, pleased but distracted. On his desk lay acquisition proposals for 3 struggling community hospitals, facilities that served neighborhoods like the one Dorothy had grown up in. "Dorothy," he said suddenly, interrupting his own thoughts, "do you think healthcare is fundamentally broken or just misaligned with human needs?" She blinked, surprised by the philosophical turn. "I think," she answered slowly, "that healing and profit make uncomfortable partners. When we forget that systems exist to serve people, not the other way around, suffering is inevitable." Her simple wisdom struck him with unexpected force. Later that day, he shocked his board by announcing a complete strategic pivot. Steele Enterprises would transition from luxury real estate to community infrastructure and healthcare facilities, beginning with those 3 struggling hospitals. "Have you lost your mind?" demanded Victor Jenkins, his longest-serving board member and his father's oldest friend. "We're a real estate company, not a charity." Robert met his gaze steadily. "We're evolving," he replied. "And if that makes some of you uncomfortable, I understand. But this is the direction we're moving." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Protests, threats of shareholder revolts, predictions of financial disaster. Through it all, Robert remained calm, his new purpose functioning as an anchor in the storm. What would become of Robert's bold new vision? And how would this dramatic shift impact Dorothy's future? Fall painted Chicago in rust and gold as Dorothy prepared for her nursing certification exams. Life had settled into a rhythm she'd never dared imagine. Her mother healthy and teaching music again from their small apartment, her studies progressing steadily, and her part-time position at Steele Enterprises providing comfortable financial security. The company itself had undergone a metamorphosis that business schools would study for years to come. Under Robert's unwavering direction, Steele had divested from luxury developments and methodically acquired healthcare properties across 3 states, transforming them into efficiently run facilities that prioritized patient care while remaining financially sustainable. The press had dubbed it the Steele model, and health policy experts were taking notice. Dorothy followed these developments with personal investment, recognizing how her own story had somehow catalyzed this larger change. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was the deeper transformation occurring within Robert himself. The loneliness that had once seemed like an acceptable cost of success now felt increasingly intolerable. His sprawling penthouse echoed with silence. Business associates who had once courted his attention now regarded him with confusion or outright disapproval. He found himself, for perhaps the first time since childhood, without a clear roadmap for his personal life. One crisp October evening, Dorothy was studying in the hospital cafeteria when she glanced up to find Robert standing uncertainly at her table, 2 coffee cups in hand. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "I've been meeting with the cardiology department about expanding their preventative care program." Dorothy gestured to the empty chair, surprised but not displeased by the interruption. They talked easily about hospital administration challenges, Dorothy's upcoming exams, and Evelyn's growing roster of piano students. As closing time approached, Robert hesitated, then asked, "Would you consider joining the advisory board for our new community wellness initiative? We need voices like yours, people who understand both the system and its impact on real lives." Dorothy set down her pen, studying him with new awareness. This wasn't charity or obligation speaking anymore. It was genuine professional respect. "I'm still completing my certification," she reminded him. "All the more reason," he countered. "You bring a perspective we desperately need." As they walked toward the parking garage, an unexpected, comfortable silence between them, Dorothy realized something had fundamentally shifted. They were no longer benefactor and recipient, employer and employee, powerful and powerless. They had become improbably collaborators, perhaps even friends. Winter descended with record snowfall, blanketing the city in hushed white. Dorothy passed her certification with distinguished marks, and in January she joined the nursing staff at Northwestern Memorial, the very hospital where her mother had received life-saving surgery. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Meanwhile, Robert's transformation of Steel Enterprises continued to generate both controversy and cautious admiration. Financial publications that had once celebrated his cutthroat acquisition tactics now wrote puzzled profiles about his humanitarian pivot, searching for hidden angles or ulterior motives. What they failed to grasp was the simplicity at the core of his evolution. He had learned to see the humanity in the systems he built. One snowy evening, as Dorothy finished her shift, she found Robert waiting in the hospital lobby, his tall figure striking against the antiseptic backdrop. "I didn't know you were visiting today," she said, surprised. "I'm not here officially," he replied. "I wanted to show you something, if you have time." Curious, Dorothy followed him to his car, where his driver whisked them through snow-covered streets to a familiar neighborhood, her neighborhood. But instead of stopping at her apartment building, they continued to a boarded-up community center she'd passed countless times growing up. Except now, the boards were gone, and lights glowed warmly from within. "What is this?" she asked as they stepped from the car. "The first of what I hope will be many," Robert answered, leading her inside. The dilapidated building had been transformed into a modern health education center, with classrooms, a small clinic, and a commercial teaching kitchen. "For preventative care, health literacy, nutrition classes," he explained as they toured the space. "And this," he paused before a door bearing a small plaque, "the Evelyn Clark Memorial Scholarship Office." Dorothy's breath caught. "My mother isn't—" "No," Robert quickly clarified, "and I pray she has many years ahead. But her story, your story, inspired this. The scholarship will support local students pursuing medical and nursing degrees with guaranteed positions upon graduation." Dorothy touched the plaque gently, her fingers tracing her mother's name. "Why are you showing me this now, before it's opened?" Robert hesitated, then answered with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Because I've realized something important. This work, all of it, needs to outlast me, and I want to make sure it's done right." The unspoken question hung between them. "Would you help guide this legacy?" Will Dorothy accept this new role in Robert's vision? And what will become of their evolving relationship as they face the greatest challenge yet? Spring arrived with verdant promise. The Health Education Center, now named the Clark Steele Community Wellness Center, opened to immediate community embrace. Dorothy, while maintaining her nursing position, had accepted a role on the center's leadership committee, bringing practical expertise to ambitious initiatives. Robert, meanwhile, faced his greatest business challenge yet. His board had finally revolted, calling a shareholder vote to potentially oust him from the company his father had founded and he had transformed. "You've betrayed the very purpose of this organization," Victor Jenkins told him bluntly during a tense meeting. "Profits down 16% while you chase humanitarian pipe dreams. Your father would be ashamed." The words were calculated to wound, and they found their mark. Yet rather than retreat, Robert doubled down. He spent weeks meeting personally with major shareholders, articulating a vision of corporate responsibility that looked beyond quarterly earnings to generational impact. It was during this fight for his professional life that Robert realized how profoundly his priorities had shifted. The prospect of losing control of Steele Enterprises still troubled him, but not for the reasons it once would have. His concern now was for the communities and patients who depended on the healthcare facilities he'd established, for the employees whose lives had improved under progressive labor policies, and for the legacy of positive change he'd only just begun to build. On the evening before the shareholder vote, Robert found himself once again at Evelyn's apartment, where Dorothy had organized a small gathering of center volunteers. He watched from the periphery as she moved confidently among them, inspiring commitment with her quiet passion. Evelyn appeared at his side, offering tea. "My daughter has found her purpose," she observed, following his gaze. "Thanks in no small part to you." Robert shook his head. "She always had it. I just helped clear some obstacles." Evelyn studied him thoughtfully. "And you? Have you found yours?" The question lingered as Dorothy approached, concern evident in her expression. "Tomorrow's the vote," she said. "Are you ready?" Robert surprised himself by smiling genuinely. "Whatever happens," he replied, "the work continues. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen. Some changes, once begun, can't be reversed." As the evening wound down, Dorothy walked him to his car through a gentle spring rain. "Thank you," he said suddenly, "for crying in my office that morning." She looked at him, startled. "I've never thanked anyone for crying before," he admitted, with a self-deprecating laugh. "But if I hadn't walked in early that day, then we wouldn't be here," she finished softly. "And here is a good place to be." The simple truth of her words settled over him like a benediction. The shareholder meeting convened in the gleaming downtown headquarters of Steele Enterprises, tension palpable among the assembled power brokers of Chicago's business elite. Robert stood at the podium, surveying the faces before him, some hostile, some calculating, a few openly supportive. This was the moment that would determine whether his vision for a more humane capitalism would continue or whether he would be forced to watch from the sidelines as his company reverted to its old priorities. He had prepared extensive financial projections, impact assessments, and sustainability metrics, but as he gazed across the room, he saw Dorothy slip quietly into the back, still wearing her nursing scrubs, clearly having come directly from her shift. In that moment, he set aside his prepared remarks. 10 months ago," he began, "I witnessed something that changed everything. A woman crying because she couldn't save her mother despite working 3 jobs. A system so broken that human dignity had become collateral damage in the pursuit of profit." A murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the defense they had expected. Since then, he continued, we've created a model that delivers quality healthcare while maintaining profitability. Lower margins, yes, but sustainable ones, with decreased staff turnover, improved patient outcomes, and community goodwill that no marketing budget could purchase. He paused, then spoke directly to the harshest critics in the front row. My father built this company with a singular focus on wealth accumulation. I inherited that vision and expanded it beyond his wildest dreams. But legacy isn't about replicating the past. It's about responding to the present while building toward a better future. The vote, when it came, was narrow, painfully so. But Robert maintained control, if only by the slimmest of margins. As the room emptied, Dorothy approached, her expression a mixture of relief and something deeper. Congratulations, she said simply. What happens now? Robert considered the question, suddenly aware of crossroads that extended beyond business. Strategy. Now, he replied, we build something that matters. As they stood together in the emptied boardroom, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the polished table, both recognized that their improbable connection had forever altered the trajectories of their lives, and perhaps in some small but significant way, the world around them. 1 year to the day after Dorothy had knelt crying beside Robert's desk, they stood together on the roof of Northwestern Memorial Hospital at a donor event celebrating the expansion of the cardiology unit. Chicago spread before them in twilight, splendor, windows illuminating one by one as darkness settled over the city. Did you ever imagine we'd be here? Dorothy asked, her nursing badge gleaming alongside the small gold pin that marked her as a Steel Foundation board member. She had completed her transition from hospital staff to full-time leadership in community health care, her natural gifts for organization and empathy making her invaluable to the growing network of wellness centers. Robert considered her question. Not in my wildest dreams, he admitted. I was building towers and counting zeros in my bank account. I never thought I'd find meaning in hospitals and education centers. And are you happy with this new direction? She pressed gently. The question gave him pause. Happiness had never been his metric for success. Power, influence, financial dominance, these had been his North Stars. Yet now, watching Dorothy interact confidently with hospital administrators and community leaders, seeing the tangible impact of their work in improved health outcomes across previously underserved neighborhoods, he recognized a profound contentment that had eluded him in his years of relentless acquisition. I'm something better than happy, he finally answered. I'm purposeful. Later that evening, as guests departed and staff cleared away evidence of the celebration, Robert and Dorothy found themselves alone in his office once more. The symmetry struck them both simultaneously. Full circle, Dorothy murmured, glancing at the spot where she had once knelt in despair. Robert nodded, then reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small box. I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this, he said, sliding it across to her. Inside lay a set of keys and a deed. The Clark Nursing Scholarship Foundation, he explained as she examined the documents with widening eyes. Independently funded and under your direction. No board approval needed, no corporate oversight. Your vision, your execution. Dorothy stared at him, momentarily speechless. This is enormous, she finally managed. Why? Robert smiled. The genuine smile that had once been so rare but now came more easily. Because you showed me that seeing suffering isn't enough. Action is what matters. And because I trust you to do this right. As Dorothy drove home that night, the city lights blurring through unexpected tears of gratitude and determination, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with her lowest moment. A chance encounter, a simple act of compassion, Lives transformed, not just her mother's and her own, but potentially thousands more through the ripple effects of Robert's awakened conscience and her own empowered voice. The morning light streamed through the windows of the Clark Steele Wellness Center as Dorothy cut the ribbon on their newest program, a comprehensive maternal health initiative targeting Chicago's most vulnerable communities. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. For local news outlets, beside her stood her mother, now fully recovered and serving as the center's music therapy coordinator, and Robert, whose quiet pride was evident in his smile. "And now," Dorothy announced to the assembled crowd, "I'd like to introduce the individual whose vision made this center possible, and whose continued commitment ensures it will serve this community for generations to come." She gestured toward Robert, but he shook his head slightly, stepping back rather than forward. "This isn't my moment," he murmured for her ears alone. "This is yours." As applause filled the bright, welcoming space, Dorothy realized the full circle of their journey. She had once knelt broken before this man, seeking help she couldn't provide herself. Now she stood as his equal, a partner in purpose, if not in wealth, both of them transformed by that chance encounter 2 years ago. Later, as they walked together through the center's garden, planted and maintained by community volunteers, Robert finally asked the question that had been building for months. "Dorothy, would you consider taking over as CEO of the Steele Foundation? I'll remain as chairman, but the day-to-day vision, that should be yours." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "You're serious?" It wasn't a question. "Completely," he confirmed. "There's nothing more important than ensuring this work continues, and no one better suited to lead it." Dorothy thought of the cleaning woman she had been. Invisible, desperate, one crisis away from complete catastrophe. She thought of the nurse she had become, skilled, respected, making difference in individual lives. And she contemplated the leader she might be, directing resources towards systemic change, creating opportunities for countless others to rise as she had. "Yes," she said simply, "on one condition." Robert raised an eyebrow questioningly. "That we rename it," she explained. "Not Steele, not Clark Steele. Something that reflects the principle, not the people." Robert considered this, then nodded slowly in understanding. "The Second Chance Foundation," he suggested. "Perfect," Dorothy agreed. As they continued their walk, the future unfurling before them like the garden path, both recognized the profound truth they had discovered together, that sometimes salvation comes disguised as opportunity, that grief can birth purpose, and that in the economy of compassion, both giver and receiver find themselves immeasurably enriched. For in the end, their story wasn't about wealth or poverty, power or vulnerability. It was about seeing, truly seeing, another human being, and allowing that vision to transform everything. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments, so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.